Here goes. Today's daf we're going to be learning is Sanhedrin daf Tzadi Gimel. We're going to continue for the rest of today with Chanania, Mishael and Azaria while getting off on tangents and all sorts of other things. And Gefet hopefully will go up today. I hope we'll get the English version from Rabbanit Yel Shimoni. Also an interesting perspective on the story and with a machloket Rashi Tosfot relating. So, and connecting it back to the Yeharek Val Yavor and about, about the whole thing of Kiddush Hashem. And anyway, a good shiur. We're going to get started now from the last three words in Sadi Ben and Mebet. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Gdolim Tzadikim Yoter Mimalachei Hasharet. So one thing we're going to learn from the story, a side point, but maybe an important one, that Tzadikim are greater than Malachim, than angels. How do we know this? Shneemal, Anei va'amal Ana ha'ana chaze guvran arba'a sarim malchim bego nura v'chabal lo itar bahon urevei dirivia demei lebar Elohim. Okay, so here we have in Daniel, basically says, and I see these four people. Okay, now there were only three, so who's the four? I see these four people, and they're walking into the fire. Chaval lo itar bahon, and we're going to go back to this pasuk later. They have no injury, meaning they walked out, without any sort of nothing, as if they just walked through fire. And but there was a fourth one with them that looked like an angel, okay? A bar Elohim. He looked like an angel. And by the way, this whole thing about tzaddikim being greater than malachim is the topic of Din and Daf for this week, which went up yesterday. So you can go listen if you want to expand more on this issue of tzaddikim being greater than angels. It's a fascinating topic. And you have where to go if you want to go more in depth. So basically, how do we get from here that that they were greater than the angel? Because the angel is the fourth one. If he was more important, he would be the first one, but instead he's the last. Okay, next thing we're going to learn. With the next section is all going to be about, I'm going to stop mid-sentence, is what were the after effects of what happened? Now, you would think the after effects are great because Chanania, Mishael and Azaria get saved from Kivshan Eish, amazing miracle, makes the Jews look great. Well, there's some issues that we're going to come across. So when they came out of the fire, Ba'u kol umat ha'olam, okay, obviously exaggeration, but all the other nations of the world came, v'tapchu l'sonehem shel Yisrael al pneihem, and they slapped those they hate, the Jews, which are not, it really means the Jews, it's a euphemism, slapped the Jews on the face, v'amru lahem, they said to them, yesh lahem Eloha kazeh v'atem mishtachavim latzelem. Even the idol worshippers came and said to the Jews, I don't understand. You have a God so powerful. He saved these people from the fire, and you're bowing down to idols? Because remember, Chanania, Mishael, and Azaria were not, but everybody else was. And basically saying, if you have a God like this, how on earth are you bowing down to idols? How could you possibly believe in idols if you have such a powerful God? So again, after effects, right? When there's three people that are like that and the rest of the nation is not, it doesn't reflect very well on them. And that explains their response, which also comes up in Daniel, this pasuk. Lecha Adonai tzedakah v'lanu boshet hapanim hayom hazeh. This is found a lot in our slichot, if you remember, but in another tefillah. But what does it say? Right? For this, they realize God is just, and they have boshet panim. They were humiliated. They realized we're nobodies. How do they know that this connects to this? Because it says kayom hazeh, like this day. Meaning on that day, they came to this realization. And that's because, right, what caused the realization? Not Chanania, Mishael, and Azaria going through the fire, but someone from the outside pointing out to them, this is absurd. Amar Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani, Amar Rabbi Yonatan. My dechtiv amarti e'eleh bitamal ocheza besan sinav. So how can we explain this pasuk? It's a pasuk in Shiur Shirim, which is meant to be an allegory for God and the Jewish people. At least it's very often understood that way. I said I will go up to the palm tree or to the dates, but I will grab onto its, maybe someone can help me with the translation, but kind of grab onto its twigs. Okay, I assume that's what the translation is, but just part of it. So Amarti ele b'tamal. So what is ele b'tamal? Elu Yisrael. That's the Jewish people. Okay, the Jewish people are the tamar. Now, God thought I'm going to go up to get the tamarim. But achshav lo ala biyadi ela sinsan echad shel Chanania, Mishael, Azaria. But all I got to was just one sansan. No one's helping me out with the translation if someone has it. But um, but that's all I got was one bow. Okay. All I ended up with was one bow. Okay. And that's Chanania, Mishael, Azaria. And here, right, first we see the Gentiles' reaction, and this is God's reaction. Right. Also gets God very angry at the people because right, I was trying to get much more, but all I ended up with these three people. Amar Rabbi Yochanan, my dichtiv re'iti halayla. Okay, now we're going to move to Zechariah, and we're going to have a bunch of psukim from Zechariah today. We're going to connect some psukim from Zechariah to this. Zechariah he's a person of visions. He sees all these visions and interesting things that go on. So re'iti, one of his visions, re'iti halayla, I saw it was night. V'nei ish rochev al susadom, and there was a person, a man, riding on a red horse. V'hu omed ben hadasim asher b'mitzula, and he's standing between the myrtles that are in this pool of water. My ra'iti halayla. Okay, now ra'iti halayla can be translated as I saw that night, but it also sounds like he's saying I saw it was night, almost like it just became night immediately. So that's how they explain it. What does that mean? It wasn't night. It was just I saw the impending doom. I saw that it was going to be darkness. And then what else did he see? Ish rochev. Now what's ish? Ain't ish ala kadosh baruch hu. Ah, God must be the ish. Shenema Hashem ish milchama Hashem shmo. Okay, even though we don't think of God as a man, but it says in Shirat Hayam, right, when they got out of splitting up the sea, God is an ish milchama. God is his name, so he's an ish. So the man he saw was God riding on this red horse, al susadom. Another idea, right? By the way, it sounds a lot like the Eser Makot. There's dam, there's choshech. Right? God wanted to turn the whole world into blood. But what happened? And here we're going to see positive after effects of the Chanania, Mishael, Azaria story. And this sounds a lot like also kind of Cheda Egel, right? Where there's, Moshe says, well, what about me? And maybe you could save everyone on my behalf. Well, and he calmed, his anger subsided. Now we're going to take that end part of the pasuk. He was standing between the myrtles that are in the pool. What is this a reference to? Well, ein hadasim elat tzadikim. Hadasim are tzadikim, righteous people. Shene'emal v'hi omenet hadasa. Ah, and that's a stair, right? And she was a tzadikah, and therefore the hadasim must be the tzadikim. And ein mitzula ela bavel. How do we know what tzadikim? Because the mitzula, the pool, right, where Bavel is known to have tons of water, and mitzula must be Bavel. And here we're going to show a pasuk that talks about Bavel and talks about mitzula. Shene'emal ha'omer latzula, which comes from mitzula, charavi, v'anaratayich ovish. This is a prophecy for the Babylonians that they're going to be dried up, and they're like, okay, so they're called the tzula. So what happened then? Yeah. So now we get to 1 second. Yeah, right. This isn't in the pasuk here. Okay. Miyad meleim rogez naasim sukim v'adumim naasu levanim. Okay, so all of a sudden the people who are full of anger, which is God, turned gray, and the adumim, meaning calm down from the red, v'adumim naasu levanim. And the red turned white. This is like the chut hashani of the white. So they turned white. So now, they are in the pasuk pasukim levanim. I was looking for them. Okay, so maybe I didn't look farther enough. Ah, you're right. It said, right, they only quoted the earlier part in the pasuk. V'acharav susim adumim surukimu levanim. That's why I was looking for that. Thank you, Miriam. So it said there were susim adumim, but then it says surukim levanim. So they're basically saying the adumim turned to gray and white. Amar Rav Papa Shmami. Now, what can you learn from here? Susya chivara ma'ale lechelma. If you have a dream with a white horse, it's a good sign. If you remember, this brings us back to Brachot when we saw all these dreams. And what's this a sign of? If this happens, it means you're going to be the Rosh Hashiva. And if you see this in your dream, it means this. And so this is a good sign. So we basically had here all different sort of after effects. Some negative, it put the Jews in a very bad light. On the other hand, in the end, God saves the Jewish people on account of Chanania, Mishael, and Azaria. He really wanted to destroy them. And again, this is based on a prophecy from Zechariah, okay, that connects it to this issue, even though it's not necessarily so clearly connected from the simple reading. Today, we're going to do a lot of connections of psukim that you might not have thought were connected to each other. Now we have two basic questions about the story of facts missing in the story that we'd love to know. Like for what? Rabbanan lehecha azal. What happened to Chanania, Mishael, and Azaria after they were saved from the fiery furnace? You would expect we would hear of them. They're great people, but they disappear off the face of the earth. So where did they disappear to? So we're going to have three opinions. Amarav, ba'ayin haram metu, another bad after effect. What's that? Everyone was jealous of them, these unbelievable people, but then everybody looks at them with jealousy, and jealousy can kill. And they died because of that, okay, which seems crazy. But again, you have to always like figure out how to avoid these kind of things. So I don't know what they did wrong, but they end up dying on account of it. Shmuel Amar birok tavu. They drowned in saliva. Okay, that's very strange. What kind of saliva? What are we talking about? Well, what's rok? People spit at them. So go back to what we said before about the Gentiles spitting at the Jews. Didn't say they spit, but it said they looked derogatorily at them. And Rashi explains they must have spit so much on the Jews that there was so much saliva there that they drowned in it. Okay, obviously this doesn't mean to be understood literally, but again, it's on account of the after effects, the one we mentioned before, that they end up dying because of that. And again, you could say maybe if they were such great people, they should have been able to affect the people and they couldn't, and that maybe is their problem. The third opinion, Rabbi Yochanan Amar, and this is just like what happened to the people in the dry bones, right? They came back to life. It's the exact same kind of idea here. Did they die? Did they live on? Did they this? So Rabbi Yochanan Amar, as we said, one of the opinions about the people in the dry bones, Alula Eretz Yisrael v'nasu nashim v'olidu banim u'banot. Okay, they made aliyah, they married women, and they had children. Okay, like the dream, right? They fulfilled the dream. Okay. Kitzinai. In fact, this machloka between three amoraim is actually machloka tannaim also, and the opinions match up 100%. Rabbi Eliezer Omer ba'ayin harametu. First opinion, that was like Rav. Rabbi Yeshua Omer b'rok tavu, that was Shmuel. And Chachamim Omer malu l'eretz Yisrael v'nasu nashim v'olidu banim u'banot. That's Rabbi Yochanan. But here they're going to bring a pasuk to prove it. How do we see this? Shenemal Shmana Yoshua Kohen Agadol. We're back to Zachariah, and we're going to see this character later on. Zachariah says to Yoshua Kohen Gadol, okay, you and your friends who are sitting with you, because they're people of wonders. Now, who else in that generation? This is the classic midrash, where it takes different things that are said about possibly different people, but it says we don't know anyone else. It was the Ish Mofed at that time. Must be Chanania, Mishael and Azaria. And notice where they were. They were in Israel. So how'd they get to Israel? They must have made Aliyah and moved to Israel and lived on. So who are those people? Okay, that was question one, which is what happened to them after. Question number two. Daniel lahechan azo. Where was Daniel when the whole story of Chanania, Mishael, and Azaria happened? Now, the assumption here is, right, he was in Babylonia. How big is Babylonia, right? He must have been at the scene. And if he wasn't, like, there must be a reason why he wasn't at the scene. Now, obviously, Babylonia is not small, and he could have been somewhere else, but the assumption is he must have been there. And if he wasn't there, there must be a reason. So now we're going to have to come up with a reason to why Daniel wasn't there. Okay? Because obviously, if he was there, in other words, remember the scene. The story is everyone else was worshiping idols other than Chanania, Mishael, and Azaria. Now we're assuming Daniel wasn't worshiping idols, so he should have gone in the Kivshana Esh with them, and he didn't. So he must have been somewhere else, and we're going to assume that Nevuchadnetzer had sent him on a mission. The question is, what kind of mission? So what the difference is between these opinions is interesting. Think about it. I don't have a good answer, but let's see. Amarav, Lemichra Nahara Rabba B'Tveria. He was sent to dig a huge river in Tveria, okay? Which seems like an important job, right? You need water. Nebuchadnezzar sent him there to do it. Ushmuel Amar La'atuye Bizradas Fasta. Shmuel says he was sent for a very insignificant job, I think, right? To collect fodder for the animals. Seems not so important. Rabbi Yochanan Amar La'atuye Chazire de Alexandria Shel Mitzrayim. He was sent to get pigs. Interesting. Sent to get pigs from Alexandria in Egypt. Wait a minute. This last one doesn't make so much sense. It should be it's from a Mishnah in Bechorot, and we had it in the beginning of our Masechet. Told you Sarofei Amal Ein Para V'Chazira. Yotzami Alexandria Shel Mitzrayim She'en Chotchina Em Shela B'Shvil Shelo Teleit. What would he be getting pigs for if not to breed more pigs for Nevuchadnezzar? So they say, but the pigs and the cows, remember, weren't allowed to leave until they basically prevented them from giving birth. So if that's the case, then, right, they turn them all to sterile. If that's the case, then how could he be taking the pigs? For what purpose was he taking some pigs? It wasn't going to help to have two pigs or something from Alexandria. So the answer is Zutre Aite below da Atayu. What he did was he hid like some little pigs under his jacket or something in his bag so they wouldn't see. In other words, he smuggled them out. Okay. What to do with these three opinions, I don't really know. But the point is, Daniel was sent on a mission by Nevuchadnezzar. But now we're going to see that it wasn't just Nevuchadnezzar who wanted Daniel out of there. Tana Rabbanan Shlosha Hayubo Taitza. All three people that we're going to see, or not necessarily people, wanted the same thing. Who were they? Kadosh Baruch Hu, Daniel, and Nevuchadnezzar. Daniel, Nevuchadnezzar, and God all wanted Daniel out of the picture when the Chanania, Mishael, and Azaria story happened. Okay, each for a different reason, and let's see why. Hakadosh Baruch Hu Amar Nezel Daniel Mehacha de lo lemri b'schute itnatzu. God wanted to make a spectacle of this. And he said, if Daniel is there, they're going to say because he was a prophet, they were saved. In other words, Saul b'schut Daniel. Now, what's the difference? So what? Well, he wanted the people, first of all, I think he wanted them to understand it was because they didn't bow down to idols, and it wasn't because there was a prophet with them. But, and then, anyone could have claimed, oh, it was just because there was a prophet, man of wonders. But also you could think about it that when people see some unusual spectacle, but it's with some very unique, special character, they'll say, oh, it was because of that person, and that doesn't relate to me. But if they see real people like them that aren't prophets in a different place, it'll more encourage them to say, oh, I could be like them. So that's another possible reason. So God said, I don't want Daniel in the picture. Okay, what about Daniel? Well, Daniel Amar, we're now going to learn something which is actually going to come up in another minute, which is that Nebuchadnezzar bowed to Daniel. And Daniel was worried. Now, he didn't think he was an idol, but the people treated him like an idol. And therefore, he said, the psukim say that the idols of their gods are going to burn in the fire. So he was worried that if he was put through fire, he kind of felt uncomfortable with the fact that people were turning him into a god. And maybe he was really an idol and he would get burned. Nevuchadnezzar Amar, Yezel Daniel Mehacha. He said, I want to get Daniel out of here. So people don't say about me that I burn my own idols in the fire. Because, how do we know he bowed to him? That he worshipped him? Badayin Malka, Nevuchadnezzar Nafal al Ampoi, Daniel Sagid. Okay, and it said here that Nebuchadnezzar fell on his face and bowed to Daniel. And therefore, he didn't want people to say about him that he burned his own idols in the fire. Okay, now we're going to move on to a different story. And soon you're going to see why this story is here, because this is a story of people who it's told that they got burned in a fire. And we're connecting the story of Chanania, Mishael and Azaria to another story where someone was burned in a fire, which then we're going to compare to another story where someone gets singed in a fire. To then we're going to also mention Abraham, who according to the Midrash was put also in a kivshana esh and was saved. So we're going to, the Midrash loves to connect all these different stories. This starts out with a pasuk from Yirmiyahu, which is talking about two false prophets. Koma Hashem Tzvaot Elohei Yisrael El Achav ben Koliyah Vel Tzidkiyahu ben Maasiyah. Those are two prophets we haven't really heard of. Two prophets Hanibiim Lachem B'Shmi L'Sheker. Okay, in other words, I'm pointing out we haven't heard of them because I don't want you to get confused with Achav, the king that we talked about, and Tzidkiyahu ben Kna'anah that we talked about. These are different. Okay, these are people who are prophesying in my name. L'Sheker. Uchtiv. V'lukach mehem klala l'chol galut Yehuda asher beBavel. Okay, you're going to curse people with using their names and saying, God should make you like Tzidkiyahu and Achav, who were burned by the king of Babylonia. So people are going to use this. It sounds like this, but Lahavdil, the opposite, right? That you're going to be like Ephraim and Manasseh and be blessed like them. This is, you're going to be cursed like these two people. Now it says, Asher kalam melech bavel be'esh. Kalam is to roast. Okay, it's not really to burn. So the Gemara says, Asher srafam lo ne'emar ela asher kalam. So why is that? Am Rabbi Yochanan, Mishum Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. Milamed she'asa'an kiklayot. He did them like roasted nuts, where basically they were burned on all sides. Yan asher, now what they do wrong? It says, Yan asher asun v'alabi Yisrael v'yina'afu et nesher re'ehem. Okay, so they did a tragedy in Israel. They caused other people's wives to commit adultery. How'd they do this? Well, my Avi, what did they do? Okay, now this is really how they get killed in the end, but it seems like they were doing this with other Jewish women, and then they did it also with the daughter of Nevuchadnezzar. What did they do? Achav amar la ko amar Hashem hishami el tzikiyahu. So they would go to people and say the following, and this is what they said to the daughter of Nevuchadnezzar. God told me, I have a prophecy that you're supposed to have relations with, he said about the other Navi, with Shmaya. And I'm sorry, with Tzikiyahu. And Tzikiyahu amal ko amar Hashem hishami el achav. Okay, and Shmaya said to her, you're supposed to have relations, right? God told me that you're supposed to have relations with achav. Azava Amar Le Lavua. She was smart. She said, this doesn't sound right. She goes to tell her father, Amar La, Ko Amar Hashem. Sorry, I just went back by accident. Amar La, he said to her, Eloheim Shalelu Sonezi Mau. He says, something doesn't jive. Their God doesn't like this kind of prostitution and stuff, sleeping around. Ki atu legabach shadrinu legabai. When they come to you next time, send them to me. I'll deal with them. Ki atu legabach shadritinu legabai avua. So the next time they came to her, she sends them to her father. Amar lehu man amar lechon. He says, who told you this, to say this to my daughter? Amru, Kadosh Baruch Hu. They said, God. So Nevuchadnezzar is a smart guy. He says, Chanania, Mishael and Azaria, shaltinu v'amru le'asu. But I asked Chanania, Mishael and Azaria, and they told me it's forbidden. Amru le, ananami niviyei kabataihu. Okay, they weren't actually prophets, but right, not these guys weren't prophets, and neither were Chanania, Mishael, and Azaria. But he says, I'm also a prophet like them. Liditu lo amar lehu, liditan amar lan. Okay, God didn't tell them this, but God told us this. Amar lehu. He says, okay, fine. That's what you say. Fine. So you know what? I'll give you a test, just like I gave them. We'll see if you pass. This is how they get into Kivshana Esh. Amruleh, and this obviously brings up the connection between the two, right? They're assuming if they were burned, it must be somehow connected to Chanania, Mishael, Azaria. Again, this is not in the text, right? What was in the text was the Yenafu the Beno Yisrael, but the women of Israel. But this whole story was not in the text. Amruleh, in a tlata of Anan train. They said, wait a minute, but they were three, we're two. And maybe we won't be saved because we're only two. Maybe we need three people so that we have enough skuyot between the three of us to be saved. He says, fine, so go choose anyone you want. Now we're going to have to figure out who they choose. Well, remember, I told you we're going to hear about Yoshua Kohen Gadol, that he was an ud mutzal me'esh. Okay, that he was singed but yet saved from the fire. So they're going to say, he must be the guy that went in the fire with them. Right? You see how creative the Midrash gets when they talk about these drashot here, these stories. So, Amru Yoshua Kohen Gadol, Savre Lete Yoshua Denafish Skuteu Magain Aman. So they said, let's bring Yoshua Kohen Gadol. He has skuyot. He's a good guy. That will save us. Atyuhu Shadinu Inu Iklu Yoshua Kohen Gadol Ichrachu Manu. Okay, so what happens? They bring him. They put them all in the fire, right? They bring Yoshua Kohen Gadol. They put them all in the fire. He was, by the way, in Israel. They had to bring him from Israel, apparently. And what happens? They get burned and die. And he just his clothes get singed. Shnemal, how do we know this? Pasuk in Zechariah. Vayar'eni et Yoshua Kohen HaGadol, omed lifnei malach Hashem, uchtiv vayomer Hashem al Satan yigar Hashem b'cha. Yes, and by the way, you're pointing out Miriam. Yes, he lived later than them, by the way. So they say he must have been very old because he appears much later. Okay, so this is before the destruction. That's after the destruction. And you'd have to say he lived a long life. So now we get to chapter 3 in Zechariah, where he sees this image of Yoshua Kohen Gadol standing before an angel, and it says, Hashem says to the Satan, Yigar Hashem b'cha. Okay, and basically how the Satan is going to be able to get to him. Amar le yadana dit sadikat. Ella, my time ahana bach portanura. Chanania Mishael and Azaria lo ahayabu klal. So Nevuchadnetzer says to okay, again, we're back to the Midrash. Nebuchadnezzar says to him, listen, I want to understand, why did you get singed, right? When Chanania, Mishael, and Azaria went and nothing happened to them at all. So what's the difference here? So Amalei, he says to him, Yoshua says, Inu tlatavu anachad. They were three, I was one. They have more skuyot. Again, we go back to the numbers, it's helpful. So Amalei, Vaha Avraham, I said we get back to Avraham. Yachid Hava, but he pulls out the story of Avraham, and he says, but Avraham was one, and he was saved. Hatam loha avu rishayim bahadeh. So he answers him back. There were no other rishayim with him. He went in by himself. And the fire wasn't given permission to do anything. But hacha here havu rishayim bahadeh. There were rishayim with me. There was permission for the fire to be there. And that's why it got to me. Okay? right? When there's no permission to the fire to be there at all, people can get completely saved. But I couldn't get completely saved because the fire was burning two other people, so it was there. This is what people say. If you have two, I don't know, udim coals or something in the fire, and one is wet, right? Two dry and one wet. The dry ones will fire up even the wet one. Okay, and that's what we're saying here. But now the Gemara says there's still one question. My time Yanesh. If we look in the world of Sachar Va'onesh, right? If Yoshua Kohen Gadol was perfect, he wouldn't be deserving of anything. He wouldn't. This whole thing wouldn't have happened to him, and he wouldn't have gone in. He wouldn't have gotten hurt. So why did his clothes get burned? Something. He must have done something wrong. So Amar of Papa Shayu Banav Nosim Nashim She'enam Agunot Lekuna V'Lo Michu Bahen Shenemal. Okay, so now we're going to say his sons must have married women that were not appropriate. How do we get to this? Because I think it's in Nehemiah, talks about the Kohanim married Nashim Nochuriyot. So it must be there's a connection here in terms of we'll see in a minute that he clearly had some sin on his hands, but what sin must be coming from the other psukim there? So now they say, how do we know this? Because in that same chapter 3 of Zechariah, when it's talking about this Satan and all that, then it says Yoshua l'haya levush begadim tzoim. So he didn't stop his children. And now they said, what happened? It says he was wearing these disgusting clothes. And then he's told to take off his clothes and then he's going to be all pure and all that. What does it mean, disgusting clothes? Why would he be wearing right? He's a Kohen. Of course he wouldn't be wearing the Kohen Gadol. He wouldn't be wearing disgusting clothes. They must have married women that were not appropriate for Kohanim to marry, and he didn't stop them from doing it. Okay? It's not necessarily, by the way, that they married non-Jewish women. Okay? It's just that they married these women that they shouldn't have married as Kohanim. Okay, I just want to check 1 second where 1 second. Here, it's in Sefer Ezra, chapter 10, verse 18. That's what it is. It says from the sons of Yeshua ben Yotzadak, and they claim that must be the same Yoshua. That's where they get it from. Okay, even though there it's Nochriot, here it's just women that Kohanim should have married, which could be Nochriot, it could be otherwise. Amar Rabbi Tanchum, Darash bar kapara b'tzipori. My dichtiv. Okay, now we're going a little off topic, but you'll see in a minute how it connects. We're going to Sefer Ruth. Okay, if we haven't seen enough different books of Tanakh today. Shesh haseorim ha'ela natan li. Ruth tells Naomi that Boaz gave her 6 barley. Now, 6 barley sounds like 6 grains of barley. So, my shesh haseorim, ilem shesh seorim mamash, if we mean 6 grains of barley, Chidar kosher Boaz l'temat not shesh seorim, that's a gift. 6 grains of barley, that's pathetic. Turning now to Amabed. Ella shesh sein. Maybe it's 6 se'ah. That's already a big amount. But v'chidar kasha lishali tol shesh sein, she can't carry all that stuff. It's not really a load a woman can handle. Ella, it must be remez ramazla. Sha'atidin shisha banim latzet mimena shemitbarchim b'shesh brachot. Or shesh brachot. What he gave her was a gift saying, you're going to have 6 children, that each of them is going to be blessed with 6 blessings. And from here, we're going to get off about who are the 6 people, what were the 6 blessings that each of them got. Ve'eluhem, David, Mashiach. Okay, these are all going to be her children. Daniel, or her right? They're going to come from her. Daniel, Chanania, Mishael, Azaria. Now we know why we're here because of Chanania, Mishael, and Azaria. We're going to see later. There's a debate whether Chanania, Mishael, Azaria were from Yehuda, in which case they'd be descended from David, or not. Some people think they weren't at all, but this obviously goes with that they were. Okay, now we're going to go through the 6 brachot. David, dichtiv, vayanacha me'ana'arim. One of the na'arim of Shaul said, vayomer, he never iti ben li Yishai beit halachni. He starts telling him about this ben Yishai, the son of Yishai, that he saw. Yodan, again, he knows how to play music. V'gibor chayil, he's a warrior. Uish milchama. Okay, these are 2 different words for being a warrior. He's strong and he's a man of war. Univon dabal, he's very smart. V'ish Torah, and he looks nice. V'Hashem imo, and God is with him. V'amar Rav Yudah Amarav, kol pasuk hazeh lo amaru doeg ela b'lashon hara. He says, actually, doeg Adomi was the one who said it. And remember him, he's the one who doesn't have chedek in olam haba. We're going to get back to him much later in this chapter, but he was saying it to Shaul in a bad way, almost like, oh, there's this guy, and you should be jealous of him, okay? Not in a positive way, even though it is positive. And now what they're going to do is they're going to darshan each of these words to be, the Gemara loves to do, the rabbis love to do this, as all of them relate to learning Torah. He was a Torah scholar of all sorts, okay? So Yodea, again, doesn't mean he knew how to play musical instruments. Yodea Lishael, he knew how to ask good questions. Gibor, Shiodea Lashiv, he was a warrior, strong. Strong means he knew how to answer questions. Ish Mechama, Shiodea Lisav Litem b'Mechata Shel Torah, he knew how to have a good argument in Torah. Ish Torah, Shemar Epanim Balacha, okay, that he showed good arguments in halacha. Nivon davar shemivi davar mitoch dabal. He understood one thing from another. V'Hashem imo shalacha k'moto b'kol makom. God is with him, meaning we paskin like him in every place. Bikulu amar lehu. Now, as Shaul heard each of these things, he said, Yonatan b'ni kamo. Even Yonatan, my son, is like him, meaning I'm like that, and even Yonatan, my son, is like him. Kevanda amar le v'Hashem imo. But once he said, and God is with him, and we always paskin like him. Milta debidide nami lo havabe. Even he didn't have that. Forget about not his son, but not even Shaul himself had that. Chalash date, he weakened, v'ikanibe, and he got jealous of him. By Shaul it says everywhere he went, he ended up doing bad. And by David it said everywhere he went, he was successful. Okay. Point out, it doesn't say that anywhere, that pasuk. Okay, it says it as if it's a pasuk. It's not actually a pasuk. If you look in the side notes, could appear in the Masorah Shas, or it could appear in Hagahot Tziyunim. It depends how your Gemara is organized. But they say it could be, they suggest it's a different pasuk, which says, L'chol Dvarav Maskil. Okay, where Maskil is like Yitzliach, he will succeed, and they just by accident, I don't know, wrote the pasuk wrong, not sure. But, it could be, again, the copy editor kind of just wrote it like that. Anyway, we don't know. But the point is, David was very successful, Shaul was not, and that's the Hashem Imo, and that's why Shaul got upset. Minala de Doeg Hava. Okay, just getting off before we get back to our 6 people. How do we know it was Doeg who said this? Well, K'tiv HaChavayan Chamei Na'arim. It says one of the Na'arim. Now, why didn't it just say Vayan Hana'ar or something? Why did it say one of the Na'arim? Miyuchad Shabanivim. Sometimes when it says one of, it means like the one and only, meaning the most important. Uktiv Hatam. How do we know Doeg was the most important? Because it says B'sham Ish Me'avdei Shaul B'yom Hu Ne'etzar Lifnei Hashem V'ushmo Doeg Adomi. This is the important part. Abir Haroim Asher L'Shaul. He was the head, the noble one of the shepherds that belonged to Shaul. So he was the most important. Mashiach, okay, the Messiah, Dichtiv, V'nach alav Ruach Hashem. Okay, so the Ruach Hashem is upon him. Ruach Chochma Vina, the Ruach of wisdom and Bina, right, another type of wisdom. Ruach Itzal Gvura, how to give advice and strength. Ruach Da'at, okay, the Ruach of knowledge, V'yirat Hashem, and fear of God. So this is a pasuk in Yeshayahu, which describes what the Mashiach is going to be. It's going to have all these features. These are the 6 brachot. Then it says in the next pasuk, V'hericho b'yirat Hashem. Hericho, it sounds like reach, he will smell in yirat Hashem. Unclear what that means. So we're going to have 2 interpretations. Amar Rabbi Alexandri, melamed sheitino mitzvot v'yisurim kirechaim. Not like reach and smell. Reach is a rechaim, millstone. Now in millstones, you pile on a ton of, right? You put in all the grains and then you start grinding them. So he was filled up with mitzvot and also suffering, right? The Mashiach is going to suffer, right? He's going to have afflictions, like things dumped into a rechaim. Rava Amar, demorach v'dayin. He would smell like he had a good sense of judging people from smell, okay? Whether it was really from smell or like he could just sense, like the way we say, he sensed who was right in judgment. He had a keen sense of judgment that he didn't need. Now, the rest of that pasuk is, you're going to see it right now, and I'm going to read you the rest that they don't quote here. He's not going to judge based on it, as it says. And not from what he sees will he judge, and not from what he hears. That's usually what the judge does. He sees the witnesses, and he hears the witnesses, and he figures out. Now, this Mashiach is going to be able to just sense it, okay? Either by smell or that just means, not in the regular way. And the next pasuk is b'Shabbat b'tzedek dalim v'ochiach b'mishor la'an ve'aretz. Okay, and he's going to bring justice to the world based on that. So now we're going to go off on a tangent about Bar Koziva, who is Bar Kochva. Okay, the Bar Kochva rebellion, if you remember. Bar Koziva malach tartin shninu palga. He ruled for 2.5 years. And then what happened? Very famous. Amar lehu Rabbanit, he says to the rabbis, Ana Mashiach. He says, I am the Messiah. Amruleh. Let's test it out. B'Mashiach tiv demorach v'dayin. Nechzeyanan imorach v'dayin. So they say, okay, right, like we saw before in Nevuchadnetzer, I'll put you to the test. Let's put you in the fiery furnace. They put it to the test. Let's see if you can have a sense of judgment by just sensing it, like they say the Mashiach is going to have. Since they saw he couldn't do it, Katlinu, they killed him. Okay. What's interesting about the story? Well, first of all, according to the story, the rabbis killed Bar Kokhba. Now, according to other midrashim and according to historical sources, the Romans killed Bar Kokhba. So some people claim, well, it means they realized he wasn't the Mashiach, and then the Gentiles, the Romans came and killed him. Doesn't necessarily mean the rabbis killed him. Some people say it was some sort of combined effort. Maybe this is a different tradition about how Bar Kokhba died, or maybe it wasn't meant to be a historically accurate story, but meaning maybe he deserved to die because of what happened. Anyway, also they weren't doing Dinei Nefashot anymore, really, or right. So that's also a question. Anyway, a lot of questions about this, but we're going to move on. Daniel, Chanania, Mishael, and Azaria. So now we get to the next four, and they're going to be all connected because they're all going to be in terms of, if you remember, Nevuchadnetzer was looking for, how did they get to the palace of Nevuchadnezzar? Because he was looking for a particular type of person, and then he found them. And that means they're going to fill all the 6 criteria, which means they have these 6 brachot. He was looking for asher ein behem kol mum, they have no blemishes, v'tovei mareh, they look nice, umaskilim b'chol chokhmah, they know all types of wisdoms, v'yodei dat, they know dat, mevinei mada, they understand mada, science or whatever that means in that context. Asher koch behem la'amo beichal hamelech, they have strength to stand before the king, ulelamdam sefer v'lashon kastim, so they can learn to read and the language of the Babylonians. What does it mean they don't have any blemishes? They didn't even have these scars from the bloodletting. If you remember, people bloodlet all the time for health reasons, to keep themselves healthy. That's what they believed. It was a good thing to bloodlet. So you would always have, right, like when you get a blood test, and they take, so you would have a puncture in your body and it would basically, be noticeable. Even that they didn't have because they were so healthy, they didn't even need to bloodlet ever. What does it mean they had enough strength to stand in the palace of the king, sanctuary of the king? They would force themselves to stay away from frivolity, from frivolous conversation, from sleep. They'd be able to stand there even when they had to use the bathroom. They had fear of the king in them, that they were able to avoid all these bodily needs when the king was there. Here we see the source that they were from Yehuda. So the king sees that they were people from Bnei Yehuda. It was Daniel, Chanania, Mishael, and Azaria. But Amar Rabbi Elazar, Kulami b'nei Yehudaim. So Rabbi Elazar says, as we saw, right? It's actually Rabbi Eliezer. No, it's weird. Not clear if it's Rabbi Eliezer or Rabbi Elazar, but they were all from Bnei Yehuda. Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani Amar Daniel b'nei Yehuda v'Chanania Mishael Azaria mishar shvatim. He says, oh no, when it said Yehuda, it says Vayami b'nei Yehuda Daniel, and then there was Chanania, Mishael, and Azaria. They were from different tribes, so that obviously doesn't go with our whole thing about the Sheish So'im, because then they wouldn't be descended from Ruth, his opinion. Okay, now we're moving to a pasuk in Yeshayahu. Yeshayahu is talking to Chizkiyahu, who was king of Yehuda, so again from Judea, and from the Judean kingdom. And he says to him, again, we're going to connect these psukim, children that you're going to have, okay, the Babylonians are going to take, meaning he's testifying about the first galut that happens to the Malchut Yehuda, the earlier one, and which has basically led to this, right? The Chanania, Mishael, and Azaria in Babylonia. This is all before the destruction. So he says, and they're going to be sarisim in the Heichal Melech Bavel. They're going to become, right, usually sarisim are eunuchs. Okay, so now, my sarisim, Rav Amar, sarisim mamash, they're eunuchs, which means they castrated them. They couldn't have children. This is what they used to do so that the king would have good workers that weren't distracted by other things. For Rabbi Chanina Amar, shenistar savodas arabi mehem. No. Serus is to cut off, really. So what does it mean to cut off? It means that avodah zarah was cut off in their days. It was a positive thing. They're going to be sarisim is a positive thing. Okay? So now we're going to go through and have raised 2 difficulties with the fact that they were really eunuchs, and then 1 difficulty with the fact that we say the avodah zarah option. So bishlam alaman damar nistar savodas arabi mehem. Makes sense if you say that avodah zarah was cut off in their times, and that's what it means, positive thing. Hainu dichtiv. Where did we start today? Well, they went through the fire and they had no wounds on their body. Now, if they were castrated, that would have been a wound. Ella lamanda amar sarisim mamash mai v'chabal lo itbon. If you say they were sarisim, then how could you say they weren't right? If they were castrated, they should have had a wound. Well, chabala dinura. No, that was talking about from the fire they weren't wounded. It didn't mean that they weren't wounded ever. But the next pasuk says there was no smell of fire from them. That means they weren't affected by the fire. The first one sounds like they weren't blemished at all. Lo chabala velo recha. No, it was saying, number one, they weren't injured by the fire. Number two, you didn't even smell the fire on them, which was also a miracle because if they went into a fiery furnace, you would think they would at least smell like fire. Again, a difficulty on the one about being eunuchs. So if we say Nistar Savodas Arabi Mehem, that makes sense. Here it says to the Sarisim, they were going to keep my Shabbat, and that basically is saying a positive thing about them. So why would it mention something negative that they were castrated? Right? So it makes sense to say, these were the people who Avodah Zarah was cut off in their days, and they keep my Shabbat and all that. Positive, positive. Right? The Gemara is going to say, the pasuk is going to say bad things about tzaddikim, that they were eunuchs, castrated. So, ha v'ha ha v'bhu. So they say, sarisim, you could say they were really eunuchs, but they were also nistar savodas rabim, and that pasuk is referring to the positive meaning of it. So according to this answer, we have to end up saying it means actually both and not one or. Next question. This one's going to say eunuchs actually make sense according to this next pasuk. Yad Vashem. This is where Yad Vashem comes from. Okay, I'm going to have in my house, in my walls, a Yad Vashem, like a memorial. But tov mi banim u'banim banot. This is going to be better than banim or banot because, okay, it's another pasuk in Yeshayahu, and that they're going, this is what's going to, right, they're going to have. And then, I just want to see one thing. Right. This is in the same chapter. This is the next pasuk after Kamar la Sarisim. Okay, so there's Sarisim, and then there's going to be a Yav Hashem better than Banim Ubanot. Sounds like they didn't have children, right? Because they're going to have something that's better than Banim Ubanot. If it's the Avodah Zarah was cut off in their days, why is it saying better than children? Sounds like they didn't have children. So it means they had sons and children, but they died. Okay, and therefore they're going to need something that's better than banim or banot, but that doesn't have to do with the fact that they're sarisim. So we've answered that, even though it's maybe a bit of a weak answer. Now the next pasuk is okay. My shem olam aten lo asher lo yikaret. I'm going to give him a name forever that will not be cut off, and this is going to be said as a reference to Daniel. Amar Rabbi Tanchum darash bar kapara b'tzipori zeh sefer Daniel shenikra shmo. What's a memorial forever that will never, that will always last? A shem olam. That's getting a book named after you. So Daniel has a book named after him, and that's what it's referring to Daniel and the Diyad Shem Olam. From this, we're going to get off on a tangent, which will take us to the end of the daf, which is Michte Kol Mile de Ezra and Nechemia ben Chachilayim. Now we call the books Ezra and Nechemia, right? There's Ezra has an X number of chapters, and Nechemia has another, a little bit more. In those days, it's clear from this sugya and others that it was just Ezra. It was all one book called Ezra. So they say, wait a minute, if Nechemia was so great and rewrote this book, and most of the book is his, or at least the majority, more than 50%. So why wasn't the book named for him? Okay, so if most of it says Kol Mile, it doesn't mean everything of Ezra, but a lot of it, Nechemia ben Chachilayim Marinu, he said it. When Nechemia ben Chachilayim, my time Alo Ikri Sifra al Shmei, why is his book not in his name? I'm Rabbi Yomi Bar Abba, so we're going to have two answers. He thought too much of himself. God should remember me l'tovah, saying like, I'm great. I've done a lot of good things. But David also said, God should remember me. So, and that's a prayer, right? That's not viewed as a bad thing. Where it says, right, and redeem me because, take me out, give me salvation. David rachamehu dekabaylo, because David said it as a prayer. Nechemia said it as, I'm great and I deserve greatness. Rav Yosef amar mipnei shesiper b'knutan shel rishonim. Rav Yosef says it's because he said bad things about the people who came before him. Presumably, we're going to be talking about Daniel. Shneimar v'hapachot harishonim asher hayu lefanai yichbidu al ha'am v'yikchu mehem belechem v'yayin achad kesef shkalim arba'im. Okay, basically he says the people before me put taxes on the people, made them pay them all this stuff. These were the ones in charge before. Now Daniel was in Babylonia, but they say he must have been in Israel at some point, and he must be talking about Daniel. Ba'af al Daniel shegadol mimenu siper, and even on Daniel who was greater than him, and that's why he lost the book being named after him. Uminal and Digadol mimenu. How do we know Daniel was greater? Dichtiv ra'iti ani Daniel levadia tamareh, because Daniel says, I alone saw this vision. V'anashim asher yuimi lo ra'u tamareh, and I was with other people and they didn't see what I saw. They did see something, but not what I saw, and they got really scared and they ran away and hid. We're going back now to that. Who were those people? Okay, they were Zachariah, Chagai, Malachi, who were all prophets. Now, Nehemiah wasn't even a prophet, so of course he was less than Daniel, and then yet he said these bad things about him, and therefore, and assuming he was included in those people, that's why Nehemiah lost the name of his book. Okay, now we're going to just do a quick review. We're going to continue where we left off today. It kind of continues into tomorrow, but we'll stop mid idea. But we started with the tzaddikim were greater than the angels, which listen to Din and Daf about that. Again, Gefet about Chanania, Mishael and Azaria, and the whole connection also, by the way, the Purim story, she connects it with that also, and besides in the Arei Val Yavor Sugya, and even I think a little to Pesach. Then we saw that when they the after effects of them going through this fiery furnace, which some were positive, some were negative. From there, we got to these other people who went in fiery furnaces and weren't necessarily saved in the same way. Some died, some didn't. We had the Nevi'ei Sheker, we had the Yoshua Kohen Gadol, who they all went together. Then we went to the 6 Olim, and we went to the 6 sons or 6 descendants of Ruth, who all had 6 blessings, and we went through all the psukim there. And then because we got to, at the end there, about Daniel, and about the Sarisim, then we said, who are the Sarisim? That were told to Chizkiyahu, which ended up being the Chanania, Mishael, Azaria, Daniel. Who are these Sarisim? And then we went through, what does it mean that they were Sarisim? Were they eunuchs, or was it that Avodah Zarah was stopped in their day? And then we had different difficulties on different opinions there. And from that, we got on to Daniel. His book was named after him. And then why wasn't Nehemiah's book? With that, we finished for today. Wishing everyone a good day, maybe a quiet day. Maybe hear good news. B'Shalom Tov.